what I wanted to say is really I'm just a storyteller, Sam. That's who I am, and I'm a storyteller of true stories, magic, mystery, imagination, whatever you want to call it. But these are all stories that I've heard through the oracles that I've worked with, and have been given proof time and time again of what has happened. And this is what I like to do. I just like to share my stories. What the stories have done, as I've learnt over the years, everything that I've ever done has given me extra knowledge, and each story has a tale in it that has something to say, not just to me or the person that's saying it, but to the rest of humanity. There is a lesson in every story, and sometimes it's very simple, but really all it comes down to is love, care and compassion. It's not, and sometimes it's a big story. So I thought what I would do is I would read you some of my stories. But first of all, I would tell you about the person that I started working with when I came to the island. The island is such a magical place. And I met with an amazing woman. She hated to be called a medium, and her name was Margot Williams, and she lived just down the road from me here, and just down the road from me when I first came to the island. And she was an extraordinary medium. Absolutely extraordinary. She had no idea that these powers were going to be, she was going to be blessed with these powers, I should say. And what happened? She'd always been able to astral travel from a baby, from a child. She'd always been able to see people's auras. She could always tell if someone was lying because the aura would immediately change. And so I met her in 1977-78. And when I met her, she had just begun receiving communication from what she referred to as drop-in communicators. And these people would drop in of a morning when she was around the house. She'd pick up a pen and a pencil and paper, and she would write down exactly what she was hearing. Now I have here a sample of the kind of writing. It's called automatic writing. There it is. And it's completely joined together. No I's crossed, no I's dotted, no T's crossed, nothing. And the information used to come through at tremendous speed. She would be writing like this. And then she would read it out. Well, of course, when this all started, she was 56 years old. Her husband was retired. He had worked in South Africa, and they'd come home. But he hadn't been at all well, and he'd had to come back to England. And so they found this little place over there. And she said to him one day, "It's very strange. I was cooking the lunch and I heard this voice. And it was a woman's voice. And she said, 'My name is Jane.' And she said, 'I thought someone had come in through the front door.' So I walked out into the hall and there was no one there. So I went back to my cooking. 'My name is Jane.' Came again. And she said, 'I was impressed to pick up a pencil and paper.' She said, 'I looked in the hall, there still was no one there.' So I wrote down what Jane had to say. And she told the story of a very, very unhappy married life and how she'd had to witness some terrible things. Her husband was violent and cruel, and she'd actually witnessed him murder his friend, and he'd made her drag the carpet that all the blood was on with the body and take it out somewhere and bury it. And she'd had to contain this information all her life. All her children died. All her babies were either stillborn or died shortly after birth. So she'd had a very, very unhappy life. And she wanted to express this to someone, and there'd been nobody to tell all this to in her lifetime. And so she took the opportunity to talk to Margot. And her name, we knew her as Little Jane. And because Margot had another guide also called Jane Taylor. However, Wally came home. It's Margot's husband. He'd been out for his usual walk. And she said to him, "I've had a most extraordinary experience. I heard this woman talking, and I've written down everything she said." And he said, "Oh, really?" And sort of thought menopausal fantasy. He was a scientist, and he'd worked all his life with science, and a highly intelligent man. Anyway, this happened over and over again. Over the next few days, weeks, Jane came through and told her story a little bit at a time. And she eventually mentioned that she'd had something which was just right for a Devon tea. And then she said something about, I've forgotten what the other thing was now. Anyway, a Dr. Mackenzie had been called because she'd been ill. So Wally thought, "Oh, Devon tea, Dr. Mackenzie, I've got to find out about this to see whether my wife is having menopausal fantasies, imagining it all, or whether there is some truth in the matter." So he wrote to the Wellcome Foundation, I think it was called, and what he asked was there any Dr. Mackenzies practising in England at the time of the middle of the Victorian era? And he got the reply back, and it said, yes, there were 5 Dr. Mackenzies, 2 in Scotland, some somewhere else, but there was one in Devon. So he thought, right, then there is something to this. So he began to listen, and every single person that spoke to Margot, Wally researched, and very diligently. However, this, by the way, is Margot and Wally. There they are, sitting at the Longstone on one of our trips out many years ago. So Jane was the first communicator, and I have got a charity. I have got one of the early communicators, one of the drop-in communicators, and I thought I'd read that to you if you'd like to hear it. This is the kind of, this was Margot's, she had lots and lots of newspaper cuttings, and she gave me these years ago. So I will read you one of the her name was Charity. And she first introduced herself on June the 7th, 1977. And this is her story. "I pray thee to record my story for all to read who will. My forebears came to Philadelphia in the late 17th century, so I was told. I was brought up by strict parents who did not believe in any form of enjoyment. I, like my brothers and sisters, was taken to the meeting house as a baby and attended regularly. My given name is Charity. My clothes were always the same, grey dress, white apron and cap. I knew no other. My mother and sisters wore similar. The friends who lived near wore the same. The Queen of England was married. There was much talk of this, nay, more whispering among girls my own age. One girl, who I was allowed to speak to after she had spoken at the meeting house, showed me a book she had, such as my own pa would not have had in his house. He would have called it the work of the devil. It showed ladies in such clothes I had no knowledge of, frills and flounces, beads and other ornaments. Would that thou hadst not showed me Godey's Lady Book, I said to Mary. Mary and I each took a white kerchief made of linen and carefully pleated them and stitched them round the edge of our caps, just like in the book. When we looked at each other, we were delighted at the clever way we had altered our caps. "Thou looks like the picture in the book," Mary told me. But when my pa saw me, he snatched the cap from my head and threw it on the fire. "That's where thou wilt burn forever if thou doest such evil things," he told me. I was locked in my room until I had stitched a new cap. After being punished for decorating my cap, I went about my household duties with a heavy heart. The lady's book had shown me there were other ways of living very different to mine. "Thy inner light grows dim," my mother told me. "I will pray for thee." It was not prayers I needed, just less sombre clothes. Then I met the travellers on their way past where we lived. A wheel came off their carriage, and the lady my mother invited into our house to sit while the wheel was replaced. She wore a gown of green with laces and frills, and such a cap with a brim and flowers, feathers and bows. I did not think there could ever be such clothing, not even in the lady's book Mary kept hidden from her parents. Mother was called away to tend a sick friend in the next house. The lady asked me if I was contented with my life. "A pretty young girl in such plain clothes," she said. I told her about the cap, and she gave me a piece of paper with her address on, and told me if I ever wanted to leave my present life, I could have a new one, full of pretty things. And if I had not the money for the coach fare, she would pay when I arrived, and wrote this down. "I do thank thee," I said, "and mayhap I will come later on." I felt unsure of myself, and needed to look into my soul for reassurance. My pa told me it was time I should speak at the meeting house. "Surely God speaks within thee, or has thy inner light deserted thee?" I could not speak. The time was coming for me to seek out the lady in green. Must life be so severe and strict? Sitting on the form, my mind wandered. I must tell Mary of the lady. "Thy nature rebels against the scriptures," my parents informed me. "Wouldst thou were more like thy sisters." This was repeated day after day until I felt there was no life left. Everything I tried to do to please was a rebellious nature, my pa said. As my whole family retired after sunset, it was easy to make a small bundle of my meagre possessions and slip out of the house. I wrote a letter informing my parents that their rebellious daughter would trouble them no more. I walked to where the coach left, and sleeping in a nearby barn, I talked the coachman into letting me travel on the early morning coach, sitting outside on the promise of the lady's written words she would pay him. I was surprised he should know of her. The carriage was swaying so. I felt quite ill and was glad when we stopped to change horses and I was able to walk around. One elderly lady spoke to me most kindly. I found myself telling her of my home life and troubles. She seemed quite worried about me and begged me to return to my parents, but I would not listen. The coach had travelled a mile when there was a strange grating sound, and the coachman climbed down and informed us there was some trouble with the back axle, and we should return to the small town we had just left. I walked back, helping the lady who had spoken to me. We waited at a place which my pa would have thought very evil, a saloon. I dare not enter, but sat on a chair outside, and it was then that my inner light must have shined forth as my mother had often told me it would. A girl of not more than 18 went in. Her hair was red, quite unlike any real hair. Her face was painted and scarlet satin dress was only just below her knees. I wanted the safety of my parents' house. "Oh, how I long for thee, mother," I said, and tears started to wet my cheeks, and I fear I could not check them. God was speaking to me, and for the first time in my life I was hearing him. I wanted to be with the friends in their dark, sombre dresses and their strict way of living, not this wickedness I was witnessing. I could not carry on my journey. I took my bundle and started walking back along the way I had come. I knew not what I was doing. Only God had spoken, and I could not go onward. I must return. Someone came by in a very old wagon. "Wouldst thou help me on my way, friend?" I asked. I was able to travel at least 5 miles with him before I was alone again on a lonely road home. I must have walked about 10 miles or so, and I felt so tired and hungry. My feet were hurting. I sat down and found my stockings were in big holes and blisters were broken on my heels. A farmer with a boy came by in a farm cart, and he said I could travel a short way with them if I did not mind the smell. I knew not what it was that he had in the cart, but it was a terrible stench. But it was a little help, and after bidding him farewell, I was able to walk a little further, when I saw a man coming towards me on horseback, leading another horse. Thomas, brother of Mary, my childhood friend, whom my pa approved of as a righteous friend, wed for 3 years and father of 2 babies, approached me leading a horse and riding another. "Thank God I have found thee, friend," he greeted me. "I have had the constant prayer on my lips that soon I should overtake thee." "What ails thee then, friend?" I asked as I noticed his pale face. "Thy mother has passed on into a new life," he explained. "I regret to remember how I answered. My mother was dead, and it must have been me killed her, just like a common murderer, leaving her without a daughter's farewell." I arrived home, having ridden the horse Thomas was leading. My mother had dropped dead when reading my note. It touches me, you know. My pa was shut up in a room by himself and refused to see me. My elder brother had gone off in another direction to seek me. "Pa blames thee," my sister told me. "Thou art wicked," he says, "and I am not to speak to thee." And then we fell into each other's arms, weeping. After my mother was laid to rest, we all had a long talk, and it was the only time my pa ever spoke to me again. I spent the rest of my life looking after my pa, who did not utter one word to me again. My sisters got wed, but no man was allowed to court me. I attended the meeting house regularly. Many times I felt I wanted to speak, but my guilt of my mother's death forbade this. The apothecary said it was heart failure, but the folks said I had gravely sinned to leave. After my pa joined my mother, I lived alone, a spinster, rarely spoken to. The younger people knew not what had caused my being excluded from the community. But now I can have another life on earth, and thank thee, friend, for writing this down. Charity had only given her Christian name, so Wally had no evidence to go on. The only specific detail that he could be checked was Godey's Lady's book, and he found this to be a monthly journal published in Philadelphia from 1830 to 1898, which was famous for its coloured fashion plates. The whole document is authentically Quaker in style, with its reference to the inner light, the friends and the meeting house. The regular use of thee and thou, and the mention of emigration to Philadelphia, which actually means brotherly love, in Pennsylvania, which had been founded by the Quaker William Penn in 1682. So that was the story that came through Margot, a little bit at a time, daily, until Charity had finished telling her story. So there was always something that was laid on their heart, and it was her mother's death and her father not speaking to her and her own guilt that she could not overcome during her lifetime. As it is with so many of the Earthbound that Margot has spoken with. Now the next thing I want to tell you about is this book called the Wilfian Scripts, and this came about as a result of the second communication that Margot had after Jane. His name was William Sharp, and he also went under the pseudonym of Fiona Macleod because he was a Scottish writer, very well known apparently in Scotland, and but he had something to say. And he came through in 1977-78, and this was when I first started working with Margot. And I listened to all the scripts that William Sharp mentioned. And the funny thing about this book is that in Scotland there was another man also receiving communication from William Sharp, and his name was Conrad Hopkins. I think I've got that right. Conrad Hopkins. And William had told him to set up a little publishing company, and it was to be called Wilfian. And it was specifically to publish William Sharp's works. But he didn't know what works. And what happened, Margot wrote an article for the My Weekly magazine, which was this article here. And it just so happened that in Scotland, she had mentioned, by the way, William Sharp, Fiona Macleod. And it just so happened that someone sent this particular newspaper cutting to Conrad Hopkins in Scotland, whereupon he got in contact with Margot, and she told him about all the information she had been receiving from William, and he published the book with all her channeling, or whatever you want to call it, her mediumship that she received from William. And that's how that little book came about, absolutely by magic and synchronicity, the way things do happen when you're working with magic. And he just, when his first words to Margot were, "Lichen on stone, dried marrow in bone, life ended but started, together not parted, colours much brighter, spirit much lighter, no money to earn, no hell to burn, Fiona no more, never be poor, name just Sharp, no golden harp, clouds gone away, everyone has say, no printing charge, one book, not large, another time clearer, we'll get nearer." Now at that particular time Margot knew nothing about Conrad Hopkins, and yet there it is at the very beginning, one book, not large, no charge. And that's how this book came about. And William, in his lifetime, had witnessed a satanic ritual at the Stones in Scotland, and Stone Circle. He had been out on his nightly walk, and he had witnessed the murder of a child, and the men chanting around the ring, and they drank the blood of the child. Yes, this is so. And he was absolutely horrified to witness this horrendous scene. And as he said afterwards, the men went home to their wives and led perfectly normal lives, which their wives didn't know about what was going on. And of course, this is the satanic ritual that is still prevalent today, unfortunately. I loved this book. I loved everything he wrote, and it is my favourite book of Margot's. I suppose because I was involved with it, but also everything he had to say resonated. In every verse that he wrote resonated with me. And so that was the Wilfian Scripts, her first book. And then I must tell you about Margot's guides, because she had to have her guides to do her work. They were constantly with her, and the first one that we knew about was John Powell's. Now, John became a great friend to us, really. He actually did manage to materialise himself many times later on in our lives together. I never saw him. She described him to me, and he was usually in his uniform. He was in the Madras Native Infantry in India, and he did materialise many times and show himself in this lovely uniform. And so I thought I would read to you what John Powell's had to say when he first came through to Margot. Of all those who have made themselves known to Margot through her psychic gifts, I think I can say that John Powell's, affectionately known as JP, has been one of the most vociferous. He first came into our lives on July the 7th, 1978, and became a firm friend and guide to us all. John made it known from the beginning that it was not the first time he had proved his continuous existence beyond the state we call death. Towards the end of the last century, he had tried, and succeeded, to make himself known to a friend after he passed to spirit. This friend was Florence Marriott, the daughter of Captain Marriott, the author. John had been a close associate of Florence and her husband, Colonel Lean, in India, where he was stationed with his regiment. He was not a particularly religious man, but told Florence that should he precede her into the next world, he would do all in his power to return by some means or other and prove his existence. As he lay dying, he called for Florence and asked her to sing for him. She was a singer. And it was with the sound of her voice singing these words that his spirit left his earthly body. Thou art gone from my gaze like a beautiful dream, and I seek thee in vain by the meadow and stream. Oft I breathe thy dear name to the winds passing by, but thy sweet voice is mute to my bosom's lone sigh. In the stillness of night, when the stars mildly shine, oh, then oft my heart holds communion with thine. For I feel thou art near, and where'er I may be, that the spirit of love keeps a watch over me. And those were the words she sang as he died. The bond between Florence and John was not one of this world. Florence wrote a book called There Is No Death, in which she told of the return of John Powell's through various mediums of the day. So the story of John began long before that day in 1978. He had already made a determined effort to prove his existence, and he told Margot that he would remain with her to guide and instruct her in spiritual matters until the spirit of Florence, who is at present incarnate on earth, returns once more to the realm of spirit, whereupon he will be released from these duties to be reunited with his beloved Florence. And this was the first communication received from John. It was given over a period of days. I have endeavoured many times to make contact. One lady I found was receptive to hearing my voice, and on several occasions I spoke through her, and was once able to have a materialisation. Although this took so much effort, I do not think I succeeded again. And this was the medium Helen Berry. Now I am pushed forward from a much higher plane. I left my earthly body in 1860. I was sent to India with the 12th Madras Native Infantry Regiment, my name being John Powles. I am vexed that I have to strive to make people believe what has been proved so many times in the past by so many people who are so naturally receptive. In India, I saw a lot of strange things that the Indians could do, which were beyond our comprehension. Yet, when I passed over, I realised that anyone, anywhere could do all these things if they let themselves. Man holds himself in his own prison, which is not his body but his mind. One even wrote about it, but the man would prefer to close his eyes, his ears, and indeed his senses. I could make the medium feel a pain in her wrist, as I had injured mine. This, everyone thought at the time, most conclusive. Yet all is now forgotten, that being in the 19th century. I've got over the emotion of anger at having been brought forward, and know now that it is for the best that I can speak again, and so help in the cause of proving that some move to a higher plane, and some return to live again. Everything is not always clear when one is lifted higher, yet there are things that remain with one forever. I regret that the lady who I used as a medium between the earthly plane and where I am is so distant that her name escapes me, and yet she is written of. An old book will tell all, a red cover perhaps, in the shelves where other books were found. And here I'll interrupt John's story because I'll tell the story about what happened. He said there was a red book. Now, Wally had been researching something else, and he had gone to the spiritualist church in Ventnor and found 2 books that he needed to do this research for. And so we knew that it was the spiritualist church where this red book was to be found. And I just happened to have the key at the time because I was the vice president at that particular time. And so Margot and Wally came over, picked up the key, walked down to the church. And we just had, at the time, we had a bookcase that was just a glass-fronted bookcase that did not a great many books. And Margot just opened the door, bookcase, ran her hands like that along the books and stopped at one, pulled it out, and it had a sort of buff colour spine where it had faded, and as she pulled it out, it was indeed a red book. And she took it to the table, and it opened automatically at the story of John Powles, the chapter. I do have something here to show you. I did have. There it is. The story of John Powles. He continued, "The book was found. I was there and directed through a force that cannot be explained, yet can be felt. Therefore proving myself was relatively easy. This will be a way in which I shall direct when directions are needed. To deny the return of those who have passed and wish to communicate is wicked. Also to criticise the work of the highest power of all, which is there for all men, yet so many refuse to accept this. The Indian climate did not suit me. My skin was too pale. I became wan and sickly. Now I'm so strong and could write much, but must return later. Although my face was pale, my arms became as brown as an Indian's. These arms did materialise at least once. There was a gentleman I tried to use as a method of communicating, but I was unsure whether it was a great success. But the lady was very receptive. Now I have made contact again, and may be able to help others through you. I had a somewhat jovial nature and played small tricks in my life, and did so through the lady. A piece of green silk was quite a game between us, and several witnessed this materialisation. I doubt whether I can make myself visible, as it takes considerable effort on my part. I cannot be certain of this. With the right people I may. When one passes over, one does not know everything, as some ignorant people think. Also, when one passes over, if one does not have to return to pay a debt through a sin that has been committed, one goes to a higher plane and is aware of much, but again, not all. I hope I make myself clear. I hope that the proof all seek may be found. A small amount is written of my communications, and I feel this is the start of a great and lasting friendship with many, through you, who are most receptive. I shall return today, tomorrow, who knows? There is no time, therefore many barriers are released. Time is another prison to man. I can come and go to a higher level as I wish now. Therefore, there will be days, weeks, when I shall not be with you. Time is that barrier that all men should let their minds release. I shall try at a later period to materialise, but the barrier of time is not ready. In the place of beauty, floating lights and love, there is a sense of realisation of always now, even yesterday or tomorrow, which is non-existent. Just the present. Therefore, there are no barriers between all who float. And John ended this first series of communications with some information about the drop-ins, as charity was. And this was the name we had given to those who were speaking to Margot. It is within my power to speak for a moment. The veil between my plane and yours has lifted, and I wish to clarify a remark. Those that wish to write their remorse and their love of mankind to help show that love is so important can, if they are trusted friends in the plane where I am, make some small gesture of proving themselves. The veil is falling, and I am going on to higher beauty. And so ended John's first communication. I thought I might read you one of the ghost stories that is personal to me. I did years of work with Margot. I worked with her for about 15 years, from 1977-78 until 1994, during which time we would release Earthbounds nearly every week, sometimes two. But I wasn't the only one who went out with Margot. There were many others who, because she needed a car, she had no car. And so she had to have friends who had cars to take her to these places. And of course, I also ran a business at the time. And then I was, when I did move to the Grove, I had a lot of people that I looked after as well. And so I wasn't always free to go out with Margot. However, I went out very, very many times, and we had a wonderful, wonderful life together, which was all magic. It just went from day to day, more and more magic. Anyway, we had a ghost at 147 High Street, and which is where we lived in Ventnor when we first came here. And we came here by magical means. Which I'll tell you first before I tell the story of the ghost. Reg and I had left our respective partners, and We had no money. We were in dire straits really at this particular time. We were renting a shop where we sold second-hand and antique goods. Reg had bought his wife, he'd sold his house and bought his wife a house outright so that she had no worry of a mortgage. And I had said to my husband, I don't want any money for the maintenance of the children or anything. We will manage. And I said, all I ask is that when you pass, that my half of the house will go to our 3 children. And so that's what he did. That's actually what happened. So anyway, I'm living with Reg. And a friend of his came to live on the Isle of Wight, and he bought the old thatched house in the Grove car park in Ventnor called the Old Manor. And one day, Reg said to me, I think I'll pop over to the Isle of Wight to see Bill. So I said, that's fine. So he came over, and Bill, who was, he'd been an antique dealer for many, many years, he was a rough diamond and absolutely lovely man. And I love him dearly for what he did for us. He had a wife and 4 children, and he was living at the manor, and Reg went to stay. And Bill said, well, I'll take you round and show you Ventnor, show you around. And he drove him around, and he said to him, I own that property over there. He said, and that property over there. He said, I've got quite a few properties here. He said, I'll just drive you up the high street. I've got a shop up in the high street. He said, that's mine there. He said, showed Reg the shop. He said, why don't you buy it, son? He always called Reg son. Reg said, I can't afford it, Bill. He said, I haven't got any money. Oh, he said, you don't need money. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll sell it to you for 4,500, £10 a week. He said, and when it's paid, and that's it. And Reg came back to me, and he said, we're moving to the Isle of Wight. We were living in Bristol at the time. I said, where in the Isle of Wight? And he said, Ventnor. I said, well, I've never been to the Isle of Wight. And the day he brought me here, it was a day like this, sun shining, blue skies, absolutely beautiful. And we came down Leeson Road, and I could see Trinity Church spire and the sea. And he said to me, that's Ventnor down there. And my heart leapt. I could not believe that I was going to live in such a beautiful place. Having said that, we moved, that was in October, we moved on December the 31st, 1970. We packed all our worldly belongings in a Luton van, which Bill had bought for Reg. And we drove to the Isle of Wight, and it was snowing. The Isle of Wight was covered with snow. It was lived up to its name. It was white. And we watched everybody else get stuck up the hill coming up from Blackgang. There were cars on the side of the road, and we just chugged along. I might tell you, our children were on a couch in the back of the van. And we arrived at 147, and I took one look at it and I thought, oh my God, we've got a lot of work to do here. It was in quite a state, to put it mildly. However, Bill did own the house next door, and he said, well, while you're doing it up, son, he said, you can live in the house next door. So we moved into the house next door, and Reg did get a little bit done before we moved in, but then we moved in and it took us 10 years to do the whole thing. That was the story. But meanwhile, the children said we had a ghost, and they were very wary. And this was after we'd been there for some time. And Reg had gone back to Bristol, and I was working in, there's the shop, and then there was a big workshop behind the shop. And then there was a little cottage attached to the workshop. And then there was a gallery behind the cottage with a garage underneath it, big garage underneath it. And I was working alone. Reg had gone to Bristol, and I was working on a rocking chair. I was stripping this chair for a friend of mine, and I'd got it up on a table, and the dog was beside me. And the telephone went. And the telephone was in a little room just off this great big workshop. And it was on a wire, because we didn't have wireless things in those days. So I went into the room, picked up the phone, and I suppose I answered whoever it was, but I could hear footsteps in the big room. I thought, there's someone in the room. So I hauled the phone away from the wall, the wire, and tried to look out. Couldn't quite see out, so that was that. Anyway, I put the phone down when I finished the conversation. I thought, well, who was that walking through the workshop? I went outside. The dog was under the table with its tail between its legs, looking absolutely terrified. And there was no one in the room. So it was time for me to finish. The dog saw something, I didn't, and the dog was petrified. So I just left it. Anyway, the children said to me they didn't like the hall. When they came in through the front door to go up the stairs, there was something there, and they used to run up the stairs. My friend came, she was a Quaker, and she said, you do realise you've got a ghost here, Carolyn, don't you? I said, well, no, I didn't really, but I said, the children sensed something. She said, well, you have. So I thought, I'll call Margot. I'd just recently met her. I'll call Margot over. So I called Margot over, and this was the story that came out. This is Margot's original typing, by the way, of the story. I've written on the back of it, as you can see. It says, written through the hand of Margot Williams, 5 scripts, the 17th of the 8th, 78 to the 21st of the 8th, 78. I had known her for some time, because I met her at the end of 77. And these were the words. Stop it, please. He is chasing me. My baby due next month. Oh, help me. He is shouting, someone please. Then the fall. My baby, God, my baby. Please come back. The mist is thick. How happy I am that I can speak. These stairs caused me to fall and break my neck. I went through a long tube of mist together with my unborn child. The man I had married brought me here to stay, as he had stolen a Cassone sovereign case with many sovereigns in London, and his friend lived here. Then the fall. He was a man of uncertain temperament. Now I can tell my story. I hope it will allow me to continue my journey to greater places. My time has gone now. Come back, come back. I looked down on my crumpled body. I saw a silver cotton-like attachment breaking from it. I felt no fear. I saw much hustle. The man who we stayed with liked it not. My husband was in a tizzy, yet grieved not. My poor body, which was the prison for my child, was hastily bundled into a large box and placed in a gig. Somewhere it was driven that night and put in a hole. I felt sorry and have returned here, trying to attract attention. I have succeeded at last. Time is going. Come back once more. I was an orphan. An aunt had brought me up and had died just before I married Tom. My name was Jessica. I was horrified when I found Tom was a thief. He would go into a crowd and pickpockets, and he would break into a house and steal. How many tears I shed over his misdeeds. Then he was nearly caught, and that was the reason for coming to his friends here. His friend was not happy being used as a shelter, but I had to have somewhere, as he saw my condition. There is so much I will be allowed to speak just once more, and this I know with prayers and thoughts I can go onwards. With no brothers or sisters, no one was to miss me. My aunt had given me a warning about marrying a man beneath my station in life, yet I heeded her not. It was around 1871 or 2 this fall was to take my earthly life. Now I know I have friends where time has a meaning. For me it does not. My thoughts will linger no more. I shall go onwards and meet my child. I was foolish to allow myself to stay. Thank you all so much. I hope I will inconvenience you all no longer. There was a very strange smell on the stairs, and to try and get rid of the smell, Reg had actually ripped up the flooring and had a concrete floor put in. He'd ripped out the cupboard under the stairs. It still smelt musty, mouldy, strange. And so he'd done everything. We'd actually even put a new staircase in because during the war the place was blasted from the bombs that fell in Ventnor and it had slipped sideways. And so he'd even put a new staircase in, none of which had taken away the smell. When Margot finished that story, she called Reg and I to the staircase and she said, "What can you smell?" And there was this wonderful smell of roses. It was so strong, beautiful. And then it just went. And that was it. And Jessica went. Now that is the staircase that we were sitting on. And that's Margot sitting there. The haunted staircase. And then when I started to go out with Margot to do the rescue work, they were referred to as Earthbounds. Most people know them as ghosts. But her guides would tell us where to go. John was very prominent in this. And we would go there and rescue whoever was needing rescue. And so I thought I would read you some of my early, or one or two. This was the first little book that Margot had published, and she had it privately printed. Unfortunately, of course, it's no longer available. But in the front she says, "To Carolyn, with love and gratitude for your faith in my spiritual work." And we went to Blackgang, and she was told that she would find another spirit who would speak, and she asked me to accompany her with her husband. And 2 years ago the cliff had fallen into the sea, taking several houses and part of the rock, so that now all that is left is a very rough track with rocks, rubble and trees leaning at crazy angles. Anyway, she received the short message. In the Old Testament, it says that an altar should be made and incense burnt on it. That's what we tried to do. I thought of Sharon. I'd only just met her. My name is Ben, but I've so much to say, but I'm so weak. Margot realised that we weren't at the right spot because of the power of the spirit voice was obviously weak. So we moved on, and we'd obviously realised that Ben and Sharon could be Jewish, and later we were proved right. Anyway, he came through again after we found the place. The rock has tumbled. We lit our incense and prayed that one day we would all come back. We went into a souvenir shop and bought 3 little trinkets, the nearest things we could find to the Star of David. Then we wrapped them up and put them around here for either of us to come back next year or one of us to come back in spirit to find. or for one of us, in spirit, to find some medium. Well, I went back to London and got myself killed. Sharon is still there with another chap. And Sam, God knows what happened to him. He should be so lucky to be with God. The other chap I don't know, so the trinkets are there. 2 are buried deeper than you can get, as there's been another slip, but the other is lower than where you are, by the big stone in front, wrapped in plastic and newspaper. Go downwards and find it by the big stone. I am not a ghost. I am free floating in a circle of light. I will tell you more of this when you find it. Well, we did find it. And then his next words were, I know that the others will never come back. That is why you just had to find the silly, worthless trinket. Always keep it and remember me. When I was killed, I saw my earthly cord snap from my ruined body, and I was free. I rested and come and go at will. Nothing matters. I was an Orthodox Jew, but had a mind that explored other angles of religion, and I became interested in the spiritualist movement after reading a paper on the subject. So that's why I did this experiment, as I think I knew I would be killed. I had been warned by the family often enough. Your power is growing weak now, but I will speak another day if you can get near where you found my trinket. I am returning to rest now. So we returned 3 days later, and Ben had this to say. I was under the impression I could come and go, but now I find I must go further, so I shall not speak again. First of all, I had a dream 3 times that I should be killed on the road. Also, the other chap had a similar dream, and this made us bury these trinkets. Sam, I did not know his first name. He was Samuel's, so we always knew him as Sam. We all lived around the Hampstead area of London. This is all I can say, as I am stopped. There are 2 more such little packets, not the same trinket, but there has been such a slip and a big stone covers them. We did cover each with a lot of glass to protect them. I am glad I have now proved myself, and therefore proved the existence of spirit. The man who stands above you says I must go to the lights, so I will leave you. Shalom. Well, of course, the man who stood above her was John Powell's. Ben could see him, and he often used to help with the rescue of the earthbound spirits and take them to the light. That was part of his job, so he was able to help. Have I got time to read another one?
Yeah, we've got 20 minutes left.
Well, this where did Margot and I go this time? Near Freshwater. It was near Freshwater. We reached the Tennyson Memorial that attracts so many holiday makers during the summer. We found a suitable spot to have a rest and enjoy our well-earned picnic, and then I lay back watching a butterfly settle on a flower. Margot suddenly had a strong feeling that we must leave and go to one side a little lower down, so we gathered our belongings and moved, and she heard a young woman's voice. I feel so weak, like a puff of mist, as I am in a mist myself. Colin told me he loved me and asked me to marry him. We were both young and we were to be engaged. Then I got cross over such a trifling thing that it should not have mattered to 2 people who were so much in love. We came up here and I walked ahead crying. Go to the place where there are marks and I know you will find something. Lights surround it and I cannot get anywhere until the lights go. Leave here and go downhill away. Marks, she had said. Go downhill. So downhill we went, and soon saw several marks, several feet long, as if the grass had been scraped away, leaving gigantic footprints. I wondered if this was the place, this is Margot, wondering if this was the place she meant, when suddenly she saw something like a silver ping-pong ball, a light which bounced from mark to mark and finally settled and disappeared. We sat down, and the young woman spoke again. "My name is Helen, and I made the light to call you back to the right place. I got in a temper as Colin had promised me a ring like no one had before, and I expected a gold ring with diamonds and a ruby, which was my favourite stone. Then he gave me a silly little silver ring, and I ran up here crying. When we got around this area, I threw it at him and ran back down the hill. A few weeks later, with hate for a mean boy in my heart, I died. Oh, Colin, I know now you had no money and you were out of work, and yet I was greedy. Please find my ring in this hollow. Do not leave without it. Please, please." After reading this to Carolyn and Wally, we all started scraping away at the stony soil at the spot where I'd seen the last of the mystical light. And sure enough, after a frenzied search, Margot dug out a small silver ring, no diamonds or rubies, just the shape of a heart, with the letter H engraved on it. It certainly was no ring of any value, but it contained the love of the donor and the guilt of the receiver. We talked things over and agreed that the best thing to do was to go into a church. So we made our way to the thatched church at Freshwater, and inside we prayed silently that this girl may now find peace. And as Margot prayed, her voice spoke quietly in her ear. "Oh, Colin, how sorry I am that I threw your little ring away. My heart was breaking, but my greed overcame my true love for you. Please forgive me, wherever you are, and I know my dear little ring will be treasured by the stranger who was led to it by the power of spirit. And I can now continue a journey to a celestial land, the voices tell me. I see a silver circle of light, a silver ring, and in it is the face of a woman who calls me. Helen, dear, you can come to us now. Thank you for all your efforts, and I hope my greedy nature will leave me, as it caused suffering then and suffering since. I can be encircled with the silver." Margot knew that the woman whose face she saw was helping her was one of her guides. That was Mary Anning, who was another of Margot's guides. Both Carolyn and I were once again feeling the strong emotion that we had felt in the case of Joan, the very first find we had together, described in my book, Ghostly Gifts. And that's Margot's little book. That was the first book that she wrote. Out of the Mists was the second one. And I seem to have something in here that I'd like to read to you. This was a very important one really, because one of my other oracles is Robin Wells. And Robin used to come and stay with me as a child. My sister worked all the time, and so Robin would come to the island, and he became very interested in the work I was doing with Margot. And at this particular time he was 14, and Margot said to me, "Do you think Robin would like to come on a release with us on Earthbound?" So we said yes, we'd love to go. So Robin, Margot, Wally and I went off to Mottiston Church, where a young lady spoke to us, and her name was Joan. And this is what she had to say. The church was at Mottiston, and it was a lovely day. And these are the words that Joan spoke. Sometimes I can't get through this without crying, but I hope I'll be able to today. I think because I have such happy memories of when I was 16 and in love with a very beautiful young man called Michael. In 1937, which was the year after I was born, by the way, I stood here with David. We were 16 and loved each other so much. We had cycled to see the stone. We stood by the altar and exchanged love tokens. We were a man and wife without a proper marriage. He gave me a coin. I was so happy then, and we planned to really marry when we were older. But the awful war came. He went and was killed at Dunkirk. Sorry. I came back after the war, and that was when I lost it. Please look for it. Someone now to help you find it and come back in a little while. David, David, I love you so much. Well, Margot read that to us. Please find it. We had no idea where we were going to look. No idea at all. It's the first time we'd ever been asked to find anything. And we searched all round the church. We knew it was a coin we were looking for, but there was nothing to be seen in the church. So Wally suggested that we walk up to the Longstone. There's a path opposite the church beside Mottiston Manor that you can take a trek up to the Longstone. And as it was a lovely day, we decided to do it. Well, unfortunately, we took the wrong turning, and we had to turn back on our tracks, and eventually we got there, up at the Longstone, and Joan spoke again. I should have told you, my name is Joan. I followed you, and I too got lost. You have been just where I was the last time I came. Please look around the base of the stone, as that is where it should be. I am so sure the chain broke. I love David. David, find it for me, please. I will help. Great love has kept it shining bright. Love keeps everything shining bright. So, excuse me. Wally thought he would go off and he would find a couple of sticks and do some dowsing to try and find this thing, you see. So, and Margot and I are around the bottom of the stone, and we're scraping away around this stone, and Robin's there watching it all going on as a 14-year-old boy would. And suddenly, as soon as we were all scratching around at the base of the Longstone, but it seemed a hopeless task, that suddenly Margot scraped away a piece of grass, and there it was. Bright, shining, silver coin. And it was a muddy George V silver threepenny piece. Margot just knelt there and stared at it. She could hardly believe her eyes. We were all overcome with emotion, laughing and crying at the same time. She wiped the precious coin with her handkerchief, and it had a hole pierced through. And when all the mud had been removed, the coin was bright, shining, not tarnished by age at all, which silver would have been normally. So she then felt a strong hand trying to pull her down back to the church where it all began. And I told the others, she told us all that we had to get back to the church as soon as possible. And Joan spoke again. We placed the coin on the altar. I feel uplifted. Everything is young like I was when I was 16 and when we stood there holding hands. You have followed my footsteps and found my most valuable possession, which I give to you with so much love, and your companions' thoughts and prayers help me so much. A path of light is in front of me, and a beam lifts me. David, my David awaits. Love is so important. Bear no evil thought, ever. My token is blessed with pure love. No other object will ever contain more. David, I love you. Needless to say, by then, the tears were streaming down our faces, and Robin was standing there wondering what on earth was the matter with these crazy women. So there you are. That is just the beginning of reams and reams and reams of magical work that I've done. Because we didn't only work with the Earthbound, we worked with the fairy realm. Margot was able to see the fairies. We worked with the extraterrestrials. She had lots of communication from ETs from various planetary systems outside our galaxy and within. We did healing when amazing things would happen. There would be manifestations of silver and gold and all sorts of colours. Silver, gold, blue and green were the main colours, and they would manifest like sparkles on the patient and on Margot's hands. Margot's hands would be thick with it, and she'd try and wipe it off, and as fast as she wiped it off, it would appear again. And I did have some, and I kept some on a black piece of paper. I wiped it off onto a black piece of paper, which has gone missing over the years, unfortunately. So my work with Margot was my beginning of magic. I'd always worked outside the box. I never thought like anybody else. I always believed in magic. I was brought up on King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and as far as I was concerned, that was it. It was real. I was going to search for the Grail. That was going to be my life's purpose. I was 7 when I read that book, and I knew the Holy Grail was for me. Not Parsifal. I was going to find the Grail. Whether I have or not, I don't know, but I feel the Grail is something about the knowledge that I have received over the years through not just Margot, but Mary Madison, who was another person I worked with, and Robin. That's all I can tell you today.